Hi, I'm Bill Arnold. Thank you for listening to this podcast of Real Recovery. There are many more podcasts available at myfaithradio.com. Your support makes this possible. Thank you. Welcome to Real Recovery. Bill Arnold on this side of the studio, and just across the way, separated only by chicken wire, George P. Fraser. Hello, George.
Billy, how are you?
We're going to be on our best behavior tonight, as always.
Pretty much. We have a great return guest, one of our favorites.
Yeah, we go back years and years and years, because we had Michael on probably almost 15 years ago when we started.
Was it that long?
I bet it was.
And we had his wife on, too, afterwards.
Yep, we sure did.
Usually we get somebody who might be an addict, they might be a pastor, they might be a psychologist. 3 in 1 tonight.
Yeah, he is a very gifted guy. He wrote a book which got our attention years ago called Surfing for God. And it really dealt with sexual sin, particularly pornography. And because Michael is saying it's not about lust. It's a misdirected search for God and to have a deep connection.
That's Augustine with the idol factory in our heart.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, I think our surf music on the intro ties in with our show tonight.
Mm-hmm. So he talks about in the book, and I'm sure he'll do a great job of discussing it himself, but that lust is just a misdirected desire. Because we're longing for connection and intimacy and affirmation, but if we don't get it, we look for false substitutes. So there's your false idols.
Well, the other thing I think is that it's more exciting than our ordinary life. It's not real. It's an escape. It's exciting. And it triggers the same part of your brain as cocaine.
Yeah. George,
light me up,
Yeah.
And it's reinforcing.
When we talk about trying to overcome addiction and we talk about willpower, doesn't willpower say you need to try harder, you need to have more faith, you need to avoid temptation? That really doesn't fix it.
No, because I still want to do it. I think the willpower thing is a pride thing because I am going to overcome this. And my experience has been, unless I lead with Jesus and lean into his power, I'm doing it on my own. And I might do that for a while. But the other thing is I'm not doing what I really want to do. And what we see in recovery is the Holy Spirit changes the desires of your heart. Mm-hmm. And it's really hard to listen to that and go, yeah, sure, that's going to happen to me. It does if you have enough faith to realize that Christ already did everything for you and to seek Jesus. And I remember when I used to hear that, I'd go, how do I seek somebody I can't see? I know he's out there, but that hasn't worked for me. The cocaine addiction was very powerful, the gambling, and it was fun. And how do I seek somebody I can't see, I can't touch, I can't feel it? It's all in my head, and it's really about getting into his word, being with believers, having a structured lifestyle to where he does your thinking for you, and it's a process, and it's not overnight. It's not like doing a line of coke, bam, big time change. Watching porn, big time exciting. And the faith for me is that I got to it by default, and I think most of our guys we work with do. Nothing else works. The cocaine, the porn, the gambling, it works for a while. But when you finally surrender to the Lord and you have patience, you go to the fruit of the Spirit, Bill, that it happens. We've seen some people get it right away. I think for most of us, it's a long, slow journey.
So, George, maybe the question we can ask everyone tonight is, what are you looking for? What are you so busy trying to find? Because I think when Michael is going to talk about sexual addiction, it is connected to our past difficulties, our past pains, our past rejections. Maybe there's some needs that never were met. So you kind of lash out because you're looking for something. So the big question when it comes to drugs, alcohol, shopping, pornography, the question is, what are you looking for?
That's true. I think a lot of people are like I am and was. I was just looking for more excitement than a boring life. And there's nothing more exciting than the gospel, but you really don't see that till you experience it. And for a lot of us, it goes back to me. It was step one. We always talk about a step. We admitted we were powerless over drugs, alcohol, and our life was unmanageable. I'm powerless over life. My next breath comes in the mercy of an all-sovereign God. And until I accept that, believe it, and believing to me isn't just a thought, yeah, I know Jesus is God. It's trusting it enough to actually do it, to turn your will over to him as we do in step 3. And most of us got beaten into a state of reasonableness where we're doing that because our way just didn't work and I'm going to surrender because I'm beat. And then once you start doing it, you go, why didn't I do this before? Because our will is not our own, you know. We go back to that song, might as well face it, you're addicted to love. Might as well face it, you're addicted to sin.
Yeah, it's a problem. Michael says in his book, and I found this to be almost game changer, is freedom that you have in Christ, freedom that you have in your life, doesn't come from controlling your behavior, but by retraining your desires.
I love that.
Isn't that solid? We have to retrain our desires. And we can do that. Because otherwise you're just white-knuckling it trying to control your behavior. And George, you know that doesn't work.
Yes, I do know that. And I think for me that was pride that I could actually change it. There's a lot of humility involved here, Bill, that you're not God, that you're not going to make the decisions, you're not going to do some program yourself. Our 12-step program is ego-deflating so God can come in and take his rightful place. And for a lot of us, we count days at the beginning that, hey, I've done this for this many days. Well, for 7 years, that failed for me. I made it 9 months one time. And the week I got my 9-month medallion, 2 days later, I was back using.
So let's talk about how important it is to be honest about our struggles. And,
True.
And where do we share that transparency? Where do we do it in a 12-step group? Do we do it with a pastor, a counselor, our significant others? Where's the best place to share and be honest with those struggles?
Well, I think all three. My experience has been, and working with guys and for myself, the church groups weren't really a place to be totally honest for me. It wasn't a safe place. I don't want to wind up on a prayer list, which is the accepted form of gossip a lot of times. I do want prayers. I do need it. I think basically for me, going into a 12-step or a Celebrate Recovery where you can trust people that what you say is going to stay there. And I'm on my best behavior at church, and I think most people are. How you doing? I'm really blessed. I don't actually know what that means. I have really edifying experiences at church. I don't know what that means either. But for me, I go to church to worship, and I go to accountability groups to work on my walk and talk about when I mess up, and it's okay. And I'm also in a Bible study, and I think most of the guys we work with get in those, Bill. I mean, even guys that aren't addicts, if you're a Christian, you're in recovery because your life should be different. I know you're in a Bible study. We start the day off with God's Word, and we walk a program of walking with Jesus and getting ourselves out of the lead.
So before we bring Michael on, I want to also just let everyone know that if you are in a struggle and if you are wondering how you're going to get out of your situation, you've really come to a great show tonight because we want to help you understand the desire you have, and we want you to learn how to change the direction and redirect your situation towards God. Because I've always said people are looking for Jesus whether they know it or not.
You have always said that.
I've always said that, yeah.
And I think you're right. I think a lot of times we're looking for a goal of abstinence when we really should be looking for the Lord, because that's what we're doing. We just don't know it. Our abilities won't get the job done. Our desires won't get the job done. We need to retool on all of that.
And to quote G.K. Chesterton, he said, "Every man who knocks on the door of a brothel is looking for God." They're looking for some deep, intimate connection. They want to have intimacy, affirmation, and connection. They're not going to get it there. It's going to be a false experience. But
I would think if you're knocking on the door of a brothel and God answered the door, you'd be really bummed out and scared.
Yeah.
But you're right.
Mm-hmm. So we're going to take a little break and bring on Michael Cusick. He's our guest, and it's going to be a powerful time of discussion on the topic of sexual sin. So if that's something that has been a struggle for you, you've come to the right show. We're going to take a break and be right back in just a minute. Welcome back to Real Recovery. Bill and George. We've got Michael John Cusick as our guest. George, we had him on 15 years ago, like we talked about, and you were bragging him up, and for good reason. He's kind of the triple threat. He's got pastoral experience, he's got counseling experience, he's got addiction experience. He really does it all.
Well, the one thing that really struck out to me was he has experiential knowledge. He's done it, and he's recovered from it, and that carries a lot of weight with me. Plus, he has all the credentials, and he's very interesting.
Yeah, and his latest book is called Sacred Attachment, Escaping Spiritual Exhaustion and Trusting in Divine Love. Of course, we were first introduced to Michael with his book, Surfing for God, which I still to this day recommend all the time. Michael, so glad to have you back.
Oh, gentlemen, it's good to be back with you.
You know, we'd love for you to start by talking about something which I think is so amazing, which is, stop trying to white knuckle it and understand what your desire is and try to redirect it toward God.
Yeah, that's really the central work when someone begins to get sober, but more than that, shift from sobriety to freedom. And I talk about the importance of that distinction. Sobriety is doing the work of being able to stop the unwanted behaviors, and freedom is what we think of as recovery, where we're actually getting something back and then growing into becoming more and more who we've meant to be. Because addiction robs us of being the person that we've meant to be, from our integrity, which is not following the rules or obeying the spiritual laws, but integrity is being whole. And therefore, if we're addicted, there's a part of us that we're disconnected from. There's a part of us that we're hidden from others. And we can't be a whole person because there's this part of us that's, over there. And then this part of us that shows up in everyday life. So desire is really the driving force behind all addiction. And that may seem like the most obvious statement out there. But I quote Thomas Aquinas, the brilliant philosopher and theologian, who said that beneath every sinful behavior is a legitimate God-given appetite. And for those that may not be particularly religious or coming from a Christian perspective, we could say that beneath every unhealthy or maladaptive behavior is a legitimate God-given appetite. So, especially with sexual struggles, and this was true in my sexual addiction, I thought that all my desires were bad. And what God wanted for me was to press those desires down in hopes of, if I tamped them down far enough, then I wouldn't be acting upon those desires. And what I learned, and really what Surfing for God was about, is that there's a deeper desire, a divine desire for connection, for comfort, for a sense of transcendence, which is being caught up in something bigger, yet still being present and connected to myself. So yeah, desire is really key.
We talked about in the first segment about something that I heard a long time ago from a counselor that I've had on the show. He said, life's most dangerous question is, what do you want? And I think you can say, well, what are you looking for? What is your heart looking for? Because if you've had past rejection or pain or wounds or shame, there's a really good chance you can act out sexually, right?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And that question is really a dangerous question. In the Gospel of John, Jesus' very first words are, "What do you want?" to someone who approaches them.
Mhm.
And then later in the Gospel of Mark, there's this man called blind Bartimaeus,
Oh,
and
yeah.
he's shouting, "Lord Jesus, have mercy on me, son of David." And everybody's shaming him and telling him to shut up. And Jesus approaches him, I think largely because of his audacity and desperation to cry out for help. And he says, "What do you want me to do for you?" And he was unashamed in what he asked for. That's the starting point, right? Is that every addiction is about, at some level, a disconnection from what we most deeply want. And then, as I discuss in the new book, Sacred Attachment, our inability to simply just experience what we most deeply want is a result of our earliest relationships and the degree to which our neurological system, our nervous system, and the pattern of having our needs attended to, that prevents us from actually trusting to get our needs met, whether that's on a human level, in close relationships, parent to child, romantic relationships, but also on the spiritual level. Why we often falter on the spiritual level is that we don't have a neurological structure to trust.
Michael, when I meet Bartimaeus in heaven, I do have a question for him because the text says he gets up, removes his cloak, and approaches Jesus. And back in that time, if you were a blind beggar, you wore that cloak. It identified you as a beggar. And he gets up and removes his cloak. And I'm going to ask him, did you take it off because you knew you were never going to need it again?
I love that. I love that. So his heart was filled with hope, with desire.
Yeah. And I think of people who are trapped in addiction and you're wearing that cloak of addiction. Are you willing to get up, take your cloak of addiction off, and approach Jesus?
That's beautiful.
I think a big problem for a lot of us in recovery is we weren't concerned with the spiritual. We weren't aware of that. And I don't know about everybody having traumas or, relationship issues. I think a lot of us were just bored, and this was better than reality. The sex and the drug and the coke, a lot better. The downside was worse. And I think a lot of people just aren't aware there's a better way.
They're drawn to the fun and the party lifestyle.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I get that too.
Yeah, that's the beauty of whether a person is a 12-step program or not, there's a common denominator in most, if not all, processes of recovery or healing or change or transformation. And that is some kind of admitting of, I've come to the end of myself. The summary of the first three steps of I can't, God can, I think I'll let him. And that sense of I can't is there with all of us, whether we identify as an addict or not. And so the gift of addiction is that it allows us to come to a place of I can't, despite our delusional belief that we can somehow live apart from trusting in whether we call him an almighty creator or a benevolent source of being. Because again, I want to be sensitive to all of your listeners, but there's a beauty about that process of coming to not just believing that God exists or that Christ died on the cross, but that he's actually there for me all the time. And the price of admission is just realizing my poverty, my spiritual, emotional, relational poverty.
That is so well said. I was beaten into a state of reasonableness and open to God where I wasn't before. And what you say is right on the money, that you're convicted of your hopelessness, and then you're directed by the Holy Spirit that this is even going to be better than just stopping. And it's a true miracle.
Yeah. For those of us that have recovery, and I have 28 years of recovery from alcohol and 32 years of recovery from a sex addiction that almost lost me my marriage. The miracle is amazing. Not just that I stopped, because in those moments of using and acting out and hiding, I just thought this is as good as it gets. And I've often said that, the greatest lie to people of faith today is that this is as good as it gets, no matter whether we identify as an addict or not.
Absolutely.
And
Yes.
yeah,
And I
and the
also,
other side of the miracle is that we have no idea for what our life could be, because addiction puts blinders on, right? And we just see what's right in front of us, the next fix, or somehow trying to flex our moral muscles and wrestle this to the ground because we hate what we're doing.
So is the difference in your sobriety dates on the two things? I'll give up the sex thing, but I'm going to hold on to my drinking. Was that the thought? Because I can still have this?
My drinking was really related to disinhibiting my sexual acting out and to try to quell the shame. I was a drinker who, when I drank, it would be to excess, but I didn't need to drink. So I could go for weeks or months without having a drink. But it became more and more like, I want to put this to my lips and immediately experience oblivion. And so it took me 4 more years to realize, and I was actually diagnosed with bipolar type 2 4 years later. And I said, with my family history of extraordinary numbers of extended family members dying of alcoholism and or being in recovery for decades, and between my mood disorder, I said, this is not a good idea. And so I made a decision to completely cut it out of my life.
all right, awesome. Michael, we're going to take a short break. We'll be right back with Michael Cusick. And if you are listening to the show for the first time, we're so glad you're here. And if you're struggling with any kind of addiction, tonight we're talking about really sexual sins in particular, but Michael covers all topics when it comes to addiction. And so we're glad to have him on. We'll be right back in just a minute. Welcome back to Real Recovery. Bill and George. Michael John Cusick is our guest. You can go right to his website to learn more about him. Michael John, John, Cusick, CUSICK.com. He's got an awesome new book out. He's also got a book called Surfing for God, which was my introduction to him years and years ago. And I found that to be an absolute fascinating read. And he talked in it about how our desires, something like lust or sexual temptation, is really, it's a deeper longing for wanting to be known and having an intimate connection and to be affirmed and to know that you're loved. And if you're not experiencing that, you will look for the counterfeit option that's out there, and that will be sexual sin and porn.
Totally.
Yeah.
And drugs.
Yeah.
Alcohol.
Yeah. And I think, was it Augustine, George, that talked about disordered loves? It's not that you love a bad thing, but you love a good thing too much. And, of course, God created sex, and he meant for it to be enjoyed thoroughly in the context of marriage between one man and one woman.
And those of us who grew up with Playboy and pornography, have totally destroyed our wiring on that. And that it was really predatory behavior on our part just to fulfill our own satisfaction.
Yeah, Michael, dig us out of this conversation we're having quickly.
So I just want to, George, you mentioned, and drugs too, one of the insidious things about pornography is because our brains were created for novelty, we become addicted to our own brain chemistry. And so porn addiction is not just to images or to moving images and videos, but we literally become addicted to the chemicals and therefore the drugs inside of us. Oxytocin, vasopressin, dopamine. Dopamine is the main driver that we talk about. But that's something where it's not just what's outside of us that is the object of our addiction, but it's about what's happening inside of us.
Michael, talk about how most of us, I mean, who out there hasn't had some wound from the past? Maybe it was a rejection when you were in 10th grade. Who knows what it is? But you have certain levels of pain or emotional needs that were never met, and you start to just veer off. And the next thing you know, you're all the way in when it comes to sexual sin and pornography.
Yeah, for me, that happened around the age of 8. I began being sexually abused when I was 4 years old. I go into a little bit more detail in my new book about that, and I feel like maybe I'm supposed to share this so that somebody listens to this. But as a 4-year-old, um, when I was with my uncle at one point, he began to sexually abuse me, and then eventually he started trafficking me to other men. And that caused me at a very young age to dissociate, to compartmentalize. That's obviously, very severe trauma. But it wasn't until I was 8 years old where through through a family member and through the neighborhood, I was exposed to magazines like Playboy and Penthouse. And that began to be a kind of obsession inside of me. How can I see that again? Because I looked at it and I felt something warm and wonderful and alive inside of me. And I also felt ashamed that if anyone was ever going to see me or walk in or discover me, even looking at the Sears catalog of women in lingerie as an innocent 8-year-old boy, that I would be found out as filthy, disgusting, dirty, worthless, unlovable, etc. So those were some key wounds. I now like to think about our woundedness at a very, very basic level. And that's this whole idea that I unpacked in Sacred Attachment, that psychologists, neuroscientists, and child development experts have identified that there are 4 S's, and those S's stand for seen, soothed, safe, and secure. So, at our most basic level, there's a biological imperative, meaning if we don't get these to a certain degree, our brain will not develop. We know that infants and newborns can experience failure to thrive syndrome, where they can be fed and changed. But if they don't have eye contact, if they don't have human touch, if they don't have a face over them that's delighting and smiling, like we hear in Deuteronomy 6, where God says to Moses, tell Aaron that this prayer of may God bless you and protect you. May his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. May his face turn toward you and give you peace. That seen, soothe, safe, secure that neuroscientists now know is a necessary ingredient for a healthy human being to grow. That's right there in scripture, in that blessing that God said, tell them this because this is what I'm like. I'm a God that sees you, El Roy in the Hebrew, not to be confused with Elroy from the Jetsons. And then
That's
I'm
just
the
what
God.
I was thinking.
Yeah, of course
Thank
it
you.
was,
I know
George.
you were, George. That's why I had to qualify that. Probably most of your listeners as well. I'm the God who soothes you. I'm the God that because I'm present with you and you can go nowhere from my spirit or flee from my presence, you're safe. And therefore, there is a security in me, your rock, your refuge, your fortress, your safe place. So the hard part is, how do we connect what we believe about all of those things? Because people of faith would be listening and go, yeah, I believe all those things, but it's not what I experience. And that's why I have to turn to porn or sexual sin or a site to get some kind of connection. And the work of recovery, it's very interesting, right? That I've never met a person who's active in recovery that doesn't somehow go to another person or group or community where they can be seen and where they share what is shameful. And instead of feeling that shame, they have eyes of love and relationships of grace and embrace. And people say, yeah, me too. And there's a safety, and groups and communities like this become a place where it's secure to do this work and to begin to learn and relearn that it's a good thing to be vulnerable and therefore to be able to trust others. Because one of the core lies for sex addicts in particular, this is true for every addiction, but for porn and sex addiction, there's a core lie that says, I can't get my needs met by depending on other people. Therefore, I've got to, in secret, with my phone, with my laptop, etc., I've got to find a way to meet my need, but without being dependent, vulnerable, and trustworthy on others. So the work of recovery, again, is not just getting sober, but we get sober and free oftentimes as we learn to be seen, and that's a practice, to be soothed. Sometimes it's self-soothing, but it's reaching out to a friend. It's saying, I'm struggling. It's getting a hug from a safe person. It's somebody sitting across from you at a diner, drinking coffee at midnight, looking in your eyes, hearing your worst story and going, thank you. Thank you for sharing. Me too.
Wow, that's awesome. We're going to take a short break. Our guest is Michael Cusick. His brand new book is called Sacred Attachment, Escaping Spiritual Exhaustion and Trusting in Divine Love. We definitely want to help you lose your baggage, the things that you're holding on to, and you're not losing your faith. You are just holding on to too much. So we're going to take a break and be right back with Michael in just a minute. We're back with Michael Cusick, and if you just joined us, we are talking about sex tonight, right, George?
Yes,
like a good way to
but
put
it's
it.
a lot bigger than that.
That's a way bigger. It's about addiction as well. Michael, maybe you would give us a little talk on how human attachment theory will apply to our relationship with God.
Wonderful question. And wow, can I wax hopefully eloquent on this because I'm so passionate about it.
Good.
First, let me start with my favorite quote on addiction. For several semesters, I taught addiction classes at Denver Seminary here in Colorado. And on the first day, I would always start with what is an addiction? And I would have these very clinical, technical definitions, the diagnostic statistical manual addictions. Then I would show a Gary Larson cartoon for people that remember that from the 80s. And it was a picture of this giant heart up on an easel, an art easel. And then there was this guy standing there and he said, addiction, it's about the hole in the heart dummies. And the reason why I showed that was because it was the cover, the book cover for the book called Addiction for Dummies. So here, this is this graduate counseling class. People are paying, all this tuition. And my point was, let's start with Addiction for Dummies. So it's about the hole in the heart. My second favorite definition is John Bradshaw, the late great writer about toxic shame and things like that from the 80s. And he said that an addiction is an unhealthy, mood-altering relationship with a person, a substance, or a behavior. Now, pornography and sex addiction involves all three of those. The person might be an image, it might be a prostitute or an affair. The substance is our own brain chemistry of dopamine, and then the behavior is the repetition of clicking or going online, etc. And the key word there is relationship, that this great theorist, practitioner, and author defined addiction as a relationship. And everyone listening needs to admit, I have a relationship with pornography, with alcohol, with prostitutes. There's something there that serves the same purpose, albeit in an unhealthy way, as if a relationship did. And so the point of attachment is that attachment that is secure and healthy and that works for us instead of against us is based upon a relationship where I can be seen, soothed, safe, and secure. Now, an addict might say, I feel seen. The woman in the pornography, her face is lit up and she has this, or the man in the pornography, because just as many women are watching pornography today, perhaps not as many, but it's no longer just a guy's issue. I just want to qualify that it replicates that seen, soothed, safe, secure. But as we know, every addiction actually doesn't give security. It's the illusion of security because it's within our control. But then it becomes ultimately something that fails us, that it promises to give to us, and then it pickpockets us and takes everything that we held dear. So addiction is a form of attachment. And if we go back in history, through the history of Christian theology and spirituality, going back to the 4th or 5th century, that those writers and thinkers would call the things in our life that we love too much, that we can't stop doing, that are habits and sins that enslave us, they called them attachments. So there are unhealthy attachments, and I would consider those addictions and compulsions. And then there are healthy attachments, and that is to human beings who we can reliably go to to know that they get us, that they've got us in places of pain and distress, that that ultimately that relationship of caring and trust, that there's a sense that love has us. Now that's ultimately true with God, but we need to begin to experience that on the human level. And for so many people, they haven't had that. And a group or a community of recovery becomes that place. So it really is essential to learn to develop healthy attachments.
You know, one of the treatment centers I worked at, we would write goodbye letters to our lover, cocaine and pornography, and you go into withdrawal like you do when a relationship breaks up that you didn't want to break up. And it's very interesting. And what you talked about earlier, we're looking for God. But one of the things you talked about earlier that really resonated with me, when I got into my accountability group, these guys loved me when I didn't even like myself. And when I would share the worst things I did after the initial laughter shut down, because they had all done it themselves, I didn't feel terminally unique anymore. And it was the first thing I belonged to in years.
Yeah, yeah, that's beautiful. I mean, and so that was a re-experiencing of what Adam and Eve experienced in Genesis chapter 2, where they were both naked and felt no shame. And that story can be seen as literal nakedness, and I believe that it probably was, but it's also an emotional, spiritual nakedness. There's nothing that I have to hide. My breasts aren't too big or too small. My penis isn't too big or too small. I'm not too short. I'm not too fat, etc. It's good to be me, and all of me can welcome and be present to all of you, and all of you can welcome and be present to all of me. But then after this thing that we call the fall, and in my new book, I call it the turn, because the fall is this idea that, oh, something happens and I'm now far away, versus this is a relational dynamic, not a legal dynamic primarily, that we see in Genesis chapter 3 with that story of what went wrong with humankind. So it's this turn away. And we see that even in our turn, that God is right there, that he's right behind us. And so, yes, community, accountability groups, they become the places where we can begin to re-experience that sense. And that's why so many people, including several prominent Christian authors, my good friend Ian Morgan Cron, who just wrote a book called The Fix about the 12 steps, and the eminent psychologist and pastor John Ortberg wrote a book called Steps. And they're all writing about the transformational power of these safe communities of recovery, because it's what we were created for. It's literally not the default, like plan B, but it's actually in those rooms, people are experiencing what they were created for, which is why so many people say what's happening in the basement of churches in meetings, whether it's Celebrate Recovery or secular 12-step groups or just accountability groups, what's happening in those places is more like what church is intended to be than what's happening upstairs in the church services.
Couldn't agree with you more. I've always said that the best thing churches can do for addiction is let outside groups use their facility.
Let me just not challenge something, but maybe this conversation to reframe something.
Sure.
I want to know that my pastor has a porn problem. Not actively and forever, but I want my pastor to say, here's what I struggle with. I am very intentional in everything I teach and in this last book to talk about present struggles. Now, granted, there is a level of propriety for, are we doing our therapy from the pulpit, or as we're discipling others, are we doing that to meet our own needs? But I remember talking to Gordon MacDonald many, many years ago, and Gordon MacDonald was the president of InterVarsity Christian Fellowship. And while Jimmy Swaggart and Jim Baker and Tammy Faye Baker were on the news every night for their scandals, Gordon saw all that and humbly and privately confessed to his wife and an accountability team that many years prior, he had had a one-night stand and made this tragic mistake. And of course, he was let go, and he went off the radar for 3 years. He came back and he wrote a book called Rebuilding Your Broken World. But it was that 3 years of disappearing that he said he discovered his soul. And he has helped pastors for decades from underground and behind the scenes. He's now in his late 80s, to bring vulnerability into the pulpit. And he said that we preach to people as if they're at their best. And I think that a pastor can only preach to people where they really are if they're dealing with the issues in their own life and being vulnerable enough in appropriate ways about present struggles.
No, I agree with you 100%. If we've had victory and are having victory in our life, what I meant is I don't want to hear that my guy is struggling with it and is stuck and doesn't know what to do.
What I heard you saying, George, is I don't want my time in church to sound like a therapy session that he should deal with outside of church.
So Gordon MacDonald stepped away. He repented and then came back. And that's victory over it. Otherwise, I think the sin takes priority over the victory. I don't know if that makes any sense, but...
Yeah, that does. I think today we see people, it's like the scandal du jour amongst Christian leaders. I think the only thing that disqualifies us is a lack of deep repentance, not defined by, whoops, I made a mistake and I feel really, really bad. Deep repentance as there was a road that I was walking down that led to independence, autonomy, and ultimately deception and sin. And now I'm going to walk this long path of what Eugene Peterson called a long obedience in the same direction. And we underestimate how very, very long it takes. And I also think there's often cheap redemption, where there's this wonderful redemption story. Pastor so-and-so had an affair or something like that. And then, well, we're just going to forgive him. And that short circuits a process of deep healing that takes time, a lot of time.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree with you more. I wish the church was like that. My experience has been it's not, and I hold myself guilty too for being on my best behavior at church. And I'm sure the people next to me don't want to know all the things I'm struggling with. But I really enjoy going to my accountability group like 10 times more than I enjoy going to church. Church a lot of times is an obligation for me. I know I'm supposed to and I should. And I wish it wasn't, but I know a lot of that's on me.
Well, I think there's maybe a majority of listeners right now who'd say, yep, I feel the same way.
Michael, in your book, Sacred Attachment, in the fourth chapter, you talk about evil, and you talk about rejecting the lies about God and about ourselves. I'd love for you to develop that a little bit.
Sure. First, let me tell the story ever so quickly. The author M. Scott Peck, who in the 70s wrote the perennial best-selling book, The Road Less Traveled, became a very, very famous person in America in the 70s. He was an Army psychiatrist. He quit that, just became an author. He became a Christian in the interim between that book and his next book called The People of the Lie. And he said as a scientist and psychiatrist, he needed to understand evil because pathology and psychiatric diagnosis was not enough to explain what he saw happening in people's lives. And he was shunned by the medical and scientific community. So he's writing this book called People of the Lie. His daughter walks in one day and says, "Daddy, what are you writing?" Little girl. He said, "I'm writing a book on evil." She says, "What's evil?" "Well, I'll think about it and tell you tomorrow." She comes back the next day. "Daddy, you don't need to tell me what evil is. It's live spelled backwards." And that, when I read it years ago, just gave me chills because, yes, evil opposes everything to do with life and generativity and goodness and fertility and vitality and beauty and truth. And so the idea of evil is not necessarily that they're little devils with pitchforks hiding, everywhere to tempt us. Evil takes a lot of forms, but one of the underestimated ways is through deception. And Gerald May, the late great author of Addiction and Grace, said that the chief characteristic of addiction is self-deception. So long before we ever deceive anyone or lie to anyone, and I was a world-class pathological liar starting in about 7th grade until 1994 when I was found out in my marriage, we deceive ourselves first, and we deceive ourselves because we have been accused and lied to by evil itself. And there are two great lies. The first lie is that we can't trust God. Oswald Chambers, he of My Utmost for His Highest, said that all sin is rooted in the suspicion that God is not good. And that's the exact temptation there in lie number one. Did God really say that? Questioning whether Adam and Eve could trust God, that there's no goodness, there's no safety net, there's no person or being that you could actually entrust yourself to. And then the second lie is, you will not surely die. In other words, you can find life on your own. You don't need to be dependent, vulnerable, and to trust. You can, if you will, unplug yourself from the ventilator in the ICU and pull out all of the intravenous lines and flush all the medications down the toilet, and you can walk out of the ICU and live. And that's just not the case. No one has ever done that except for one man who was nailed to a cross, died, and then 3 days later rose again. And so there are these lies that play out in our life over and over again. And we are wounded in relationship precisely around our trust, precisely around our attachments that tell us through these wounds that Bill, you alluded to at the very top of this conversation, that it's not safe to trust, that somehow, because I'm a bad, unworthy, inadequate, flawed human being, nobody would really love me as I am. I can't get my needs met by depending on others. And so I have to turn to someone, some behavior, some substance that will meet my need, that I would trust in a human being. That's not going to work. I've got to trust in something else. And as a result of that trust, then I can thrive and I can flourish. But the lie is you won't die spiritually, emotionally, relationally. And every single object or idol, as the Bible calls them, fails us. It's insufficient because it doesn't take place in a trusting, dependent relationship by this God that sees us, soothes us, keeps us safe, and ultimately secure in his care.
Sounds great. I go back earlier about what she said about the brain chemistry and all that, and I've found in my recovery, I have gotten out of my recovery everything I wanted to get out of using. A lot of that, the dopamine, is by working out, going for a run, swimming, biking, the connections with people, the connections with God, everything I was looking for in my use and my sinful behavior, I found in my recovery.
Yeah, I love that. And, George, I like to describe that because I think it's important. You didn't talk about, going deep into understanding addiction as part of your recovery or being more intense in accountability meetings. You said going for a run, working out. All of those things are part of recovery because recovery is really the act of growing up into who we're meant to be, growing up into learning how to care for ourselves and how to trust. There's a great line, and, we're enough of the same generation that we'll remember John Mellencamp. He had the Authority song. And there's a great line in there. He said, I called my preacher and said, give me strength for my fight. He said, you don't need no strength. You need to grow up, son. And for me, I'm 61, almost 62 years old. And I try every day to come before God and say, God, help me to grow up more and more today and tomorrow, to grow up into the things that I missed by virtue of growing up in a family that didn't actually allow me to grow up and to flourish and thrive, because I really had to take care of myself and or be raised by siblings that were older than me, but completely unprepared to be able to take care of a little brother.
Michael, it's been a great time with you today, and I've got 10 more questions only that you can answer, so I'm going to have you back. George and I would love to have you come back again if you can make time, because it's been
I will do it.
Really wonderful. So thank you. Michael John Cusick has been our guest today. If you missed any of this, please go to the podcast and hear from the beginning. Michael, thank you so much, and my best to Julianne.
Thanks so much. It's good to be with you both again.
Thank you. And that's the time we have for today. George, as always, another award-winning show.
That was a great show.
Yeah, thanks. Well, we will look forward to the next time we can be together with you. Have a great week, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for listening. Programming like this is made available through your support. Information available at myfaithradio.com.